Hey everyone, we are live. Thanks so much for joining us today. We have definitely a lot of different audiences tuning in to hear more about what our teams are doing in the private cellular and private wireless space and how we're utilizing Band 53, the Althea stack, and expertise to help people set up their own networks or to help companies save costs and grow their reliability. So my name is Deborah Simpier. I'm the CEO of a company called Hawk Networks. We do technology for telecom, and we pioneered the amazing platform called Althea, dynamic routing and machine-to-machine billing for the new machine economy. And recently, Globalstar and Hawk Networks announced a strategic partnership to support the use and distribution of Band 53, or not necessarily distribution, but the availability of Band 53 for folks to be able to utilize that to build private networks. And I am joined here today with Mirsad from the Globalstar team, Michael Halls from Nimbus Solutions, who has been utilizing a lot of these. He can tell us a lot about his experiences. So we'll get some real tangible information. What are we seeing in the field? Where is this working? And I'm really excited to talk with everyone today. If you have questions or you want us to cover a certain topic, we are streaming across LinkedIn, YouTube, Discord. Feel free to drop a comment in there. In the Discord chat, we have our community manager, Mario, who can help get that conversation surfaced. We're happy to answer questions as we go along. And so I hope you all enjoy this. And with that, I will turn it over to Mirsad to give an introduction.
All right, very good. Well, Deborah, thank you for the introduction. I'm super excited to talk to you and Michael about Band 53. I'm Chief Product Officer at Globalstar. For those that don't know, Globalstar is a network infrastructure provider. Traditionally a satellite company. We've been running a LEO constellation for about 25 years, maybe even a little bit more. But in the last few years, we've put a lot of focus also on terrestrial network infrastructure as well. And Band 53 is certainly an anchor in that space. We have the ability to use 10, 15 megahertz of this spectrum, depending where you are in the world, for various use cases. And I'm excited to talk to you and to Michael about how that's relevant, about the ecosystem, about the use cases, about the monetization, all of those details. In addition to Band 53, we have another interesting asset, which is XCOM RAN technology and product. We'll probably touch base on that a little bit. It's very unique, very interesting. It's a capacity multiplier RAN system, very relevant in the context of Band 53, though Band 53, the way we think of it, has sort of a life of its own and is occasionally bundled with XCOM RAN. I also lead marketing department at Globalstar, so this is kind of a great opportunity for me to get a little bit of value on that front as well. So thanks for organizing this, Deborah.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to have you, and really glad to really deep dive into Band 53, how it's being used. I mean, what I'd also love to just really touch on in this conversation is how revolutionary really this consortium or a group of people in making spectrum and building private networks is. I mean, I think this is sort of the first time in the world we really had the full set in terms of like Althea's technology stack, access to licensed spectrum, the core, the payment layer, all of these kind of coming together. And this really is such a pivotal moment in time. And I really am hoping that we can help folks understand the difference between now and before this launch and what this really represents. And I'm really excited about how that intersection of blockchain and fintech and telecom tech are really all coming together. And with that, speaking of someone who's putting that all together on the ground, Michael, if you'll introduce yourself, we'd appreciate that.
So I'm Michael Halls, owner and operator of Nimbus Solutions in southwestern Colorado. I have been operating in the ISP space for about 18 years. And a couple of years ago, came into a partnership with Hawk Networks in the interest of innovating in the Band 53 space. I was able to pioneer a certain innovation with Band 53 that involves carrier aggregation with CBRS Band 48. I focused on this primarily because of the positive impact it would have on my wireless ISP networks and rural broadband connectivity in my areas. And it's been a very exciting journey to see all of this come together. It's been a very useful tool in my networks, and I'm excited to talk more about how it can be utilized in other verticals. Some of the specific use cases where Band 53 really shines and provides the most benefit to private networks around the world.
So without further ado, have a few discussion questions. But again, folks, if you have some questions as we're talking through this, drop those into the YouTube or the comments, and we'd be happy to answer those as we go along. Okay, the first question is, what is Band 53? What is it used for? What was it used for? And then maybe we can also touch on, and I'm happy to kind of go into this a bit myself too, but how did companies access licensed spectrum before, and where is this kind of, where are we heading in terms of like access with Band 53? I think is really exciting too. But Mirsad, if you can just kind of share with us.
Yeah, I'll kick us off, and then I think both of you have, I think, a lot to contribute on this topic from your individual perspectives. But I've been personally around and in proximity of Band 53 for many years, just because of my relationships with Globalstar folks. I joined Globalstar officially about a year ago, so I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary. And I will tell you that I think over the course of this year, maybe I've internalized the reality of Band 53 a little bit different than what I've seen it from the outside world. So at a very high level, what is Band 53? Band 53 is a sliver of spectrum, 10 to 15 megahertz of spectrum available worldwide, licensed and exclusively available through Globalstar. This spectrum is available right below 2.5 gigahertz, so it's 2483 to 2500. What's unique about that is it's just above the ISM band on the Wi-Fi side. It's just below the band 41 on the cellular side. Band 41, for those who don't know, the mid-band spectrum that T-Mobile has been using extensively over the last few years, and kind of redefining their network for not just mobility, but fixed wireless access and a ton of other things. So what has changed for me in the last year in terms of how I internalize and how I view Band 53? I would say there are kind of primary 3 anchor tracks that I think of when I think of Band 53. The first one is this idea that Band 53 is the spectrum that's available worldwide, right? So when it comes to opportunities, when it comes to enterprises and customers that have worldwide operations, right? It's a really great opportunity for them to establish a blueprint for how to establish and deploy a private network, let's say in North America, but be able to take that same blueprint, take it to the rest of the world, take it to Spain and Europe, take it to Mexico, take it to other continents, and make sure they don't have to reinvent entirely the manifestation of that private network.
Well, and one question on that, Mirsad, before we move kind of on that, that came from our LinkedIn chat from Brian Baird. Can N53 be used for consistent enterprise deployment and operation across the borders? So it being a global spectrum, can you use it, let's say, between USA and Canada versus something like N48, N77, MNOs, et cetera, that's bespoke? So I thought that was a great question, kind of really follows.
That's precisely what I'm describing, this idea of borderless spectrum that allows you to manifest a private network that ultimately creates a lot of value for your application, whatever it may be that your particular company is trying to do and accomplish, and be able to take that from United States to Canada, down to Mexico, Latin America, Europe, Africa. We currently have at Globalstar, we have regulatory approval to operate band 53 in 12 countries, and a lot more to come, right? So we have the ability to extend this throughout the rest of the world. We're looking for that demand to present itself before we actually go and do that work, which is actually very formal and simple work that is done with the regulatory agencies in different countries. Usually just lasts for a couple of months, and we're off to the races. So that's really kind of the first thing that I typically think of when I think of band 53. The second anchor is really mission critical applications. Super relevant here in the United States, right? In the context of CBRS availability. It's great sliver of spectrum. I think what FCC has done by making CBRS available has been great, but maybe not good enough for certain applications that are mission critical in its nature, right? So being able to bring band 53 into those set of use cases, not instead of CBRS, but in addition to CBRS, gives you really the best of both worlds, right? Band 53 for always on critical connectivity, SLAs 5.9s or above and more, right? And then CBRS for best effort SLAs, where you have a little bit more spectrum, you can do a little bit more throughput. The combination of these two spectrums really kind of puts you in a position to do quite a bit in the private network space.
We call this, so we've actually coined this term as we work with folks in the wireless sector, CBR yes. So adding that reliability layer to the capacity of CBRS, and I think Michael's going to share with it how he's been using that in his network. But yeah, I think you really hit a critical use case, and that's that CBR yes application.
Absolutely, this is exactly the benefit that I've seen to it in the creation of the product and kind of getting all the physical pieces put together, and then realizing that in the real world in my own networks, it's quite clear that the licensed nature of band 53 is a very significant game changer for CBRS band 48 operation. It creates an immense amount of flexibility in congested CBRS markets where spectrum is scarce. It allows you the flexibility of just another band to use, right? And it also aids you in frequency planning and frequency mapping in that same way, where, for instance, I have a case in my network where I have a very prominent tower site, and then there are some tower sites that are at lower elevation. This tower site kind of overshadows them, and I'm able to coordinate using band 53 with my upper tower and still accomplish some frequency reuse, as well as utilize band 53 to augment, say, a 10 megahertz channel of band 48. So then I have my 10 megahertz of band 53, 10 megahertz of band 48, and that allows me to produce a comparable throughput to the rest of my network and be able to provide more robust services to my clients. It also helps with the SAS and the sort of regulatory action that's taken by the SAS from time to time. I don't live in an area where DPA is necessarily an issue, or
I do. I live in Seattle, right? So if you're on the West Coast, that's a super relevant detail that I think band 53 really solves for.
Yeah, it really, really does, because it's there as an anchor. And that's probably the most descriptive term that I would use to describe band 53. It can become your anchor for mission critical and needed to be always on services. It's there. And, when used as the primary carrier, it provides you with something that you could hang your hat on, where CBRS is always going to be subject to fluctuation.
And look, and I think it really makes sense. When I think of CBRS, I think of it as a piece of spectrum that lets people kind of get going really quickly. It's easily accessible and everything else. But what I find is with a lot of customers we have discussions with, as they get going, they learn a little bit, they get smarter on the idea of private networks, and they start understanding the shortcomings of CBRS, right? So I think that's where really Band 53 comes in to offer that additional value for people that have experienced private networks and some of the challenges associated with it in terms of assets, spectrum in this particular case. They're now, a lot of them, they're on the hunt. They're looking for a solution to something that they're now a little bit more intimately familiar with. Band 53 is really there to solve that problem. I'll take this opportunity, if you don't mind, just to kind of mention the third anchor, right?
Sorry, Mercedes. Go ahead.
I didn't forget, this is a good discussion, but the third one that's really unique, I kind of kicked off with this, is this idea that Band 53 spectrum is just above the ISM band, just below the Band 41 band. Why is that critical? It's critical because when it comes to the establishment of the hardware ecosystem, both on the network side and the device side, you want to be close to the existing solutions, right? Radios, devices, and similar, and Band 53 is exactly that. So over the years, we've been really focused on building out the support for Band 53 on the radio side. It's public knowledge that Nokia has a radio that supports Band 53. A few other partners that we've worked with as well. Some additional tier 1 OEMs are very interested. We are building out this ecosystem. We have enough in place. We're going to continue doing that. On the device side, we've talked about our partnership with Global Telecom. I think the world at this point knows that Qualcomm chipsets support Band 53, maybe some other chipset providers as well that we're working closely with. That's all really important, all really critical in making this practically and pragmatically available for people to actually implement their networks with the existing set of hardware, right? That already has front ends that support something close to Band 53, and in reality, you're just maybe changing a filter to make some of this possible, right? And I know we'll talk a little bit more about the ecosystem and the relevance of that, but I wanted to just kind of outline from Globalstar perspective, and definitely from my own personal, that's really how I see Band 53. It's relevant. There's a ton of use cases that kind of fall somewhere in between these three anchor points that I just outlined. But this is how I primarily think of it, as everything revolves around these three anchor points and evolves from there.
Yeah, I think that's great, helpful context. So one thing I wanted to tease out a little bit more about kind of our earlier conversation about, Michael, your network and CBRS in general. For those folks who maybe are not maybe don't have as much context on what a DPA or regulatory event would look like in a network you're deploying, and then maybe just give us some more context. So you're deploying broadband networks to businesses and customer home users who are using this for their their television and their Wi-Fi, just and things like that, right? So yeah, curious if maybe you can kind of talk us through, like, okay, before you had Band 53 and you just had CBRS, what would happen if there was a DPA? How long was that out for? What would the sort of coming back look like? And now that you have 53, how is that improving it? And maybe just get a little more granular from a non-acronym perspective for our folks that are maybe not as telecom native.
So I'm fairly inland here in Colorado, and so I don't necessarily have DPA events, but there are other conditions that come up with the spectrum, such as priority access license users coming into an area where, let me back up a little bit more and say that CBRS is extremely accessible, right? Like, I was able to begin utilizing it in 2020. General access spectrum was there in a shared context, and so that allowed me to get going, right? I missed out on some of the auctions early on, and I wasn't able to secure a priority access license. So as the priority access license users deploy their networks in my area, it impacts what channels and what channel widths may be available to me. And it also impacts what transmitter output power may be available to my eNode B for coordinating with these priority access licenses as they come into play. And so these are things that happen. Sometimes the companies will let you know that they're moving in. Sometimes you'll become aware of it in a different way, but a lot of times you don't know, and you wake up one day and the SAS has diminished your channel width or diminished your transmit output power, and that's the network that you have now. And that was the reality of CBRS, that it would happen. And especially early on, before they got some of the kinks worked out in that system, there was a lot of changes day to day. The network was very fluid, right? The RF environment was very fluid. And it was very difficult actually to base a business on that. With the introduction of Band 53, it enables me to provide an anchor point so that it at least buys me some breathing room to deal with the changes that the SAS presents me, whether that be a change in channel availability or a change in transmitter output power availability. It allows me time to evaluate that and make a better decision on what to do with that information while my customers stay up on the licensed spectrum. And so instead of experiencing total outage during some kind of change that impacts my eNode Bs, and then people maybe have a hard time reconnecting to the new settings, Band 53 allows them to just stay connected. And then I'm able to make the choices that I need to bring that capacity back the best way that I can in those events.
And I think, I think this is acknowledged by, the greater participants in this ecosystem, especially fixed wireless access. If you think about the government grants for fixed wireless access for broadband connectivity implementation, they actually require you to do it on a licensed spectrum, right? So I think that's another piece where Band 53 is really kind of unique, right? Because that CBRS spectrum, especially the GAA designation, right, doesn't qualify you on its own for some of these government-based grants for implementation. And I think, Michael, you obviously know a lot about this. I think, Deborah, you as well. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, 100%. And for folks, just to give a bit of context, so Hawk Networks and using the Althea platform really started working with CBRS with the University of Washington even back in 2018 and 2019. And it was a similar sort of revolutionary point in time and access to be able to start private cellular networks. And it's really what started to drive, things like, open source core development and before kind of 2018, 2019, if you wanted to start a private cellular network, you'd be looking at $250,000 to $500,000 just for the core tech and the licensing and all of that. Now we've got these costs down to, probably, you can do a small sort of licensing set for less than 10K. So really the, 10 to 20K or something like that for a single site. And I think this, disruption of the technology has really been exciting. But, to your point, when we're talking about production, right, and that reliability that we've come to expect, then it really needed license. It really needed what you're getting with subleasing that license is really you're not sharing it. It's your dedicated space. And that was one of the really exciting things. And, we saw it in action. All of our teams together presented at Mobile World Congress in Vegas a few months ago, and you pull the CBRS completely out of that situation and your clients are staying connected. And still, maybe there's with a reduced capacity. And then that allows, that use case to really be accessible for small to medium-sized operators to provide broadband capacity to get those grants and really meet a lot of these challenging areas. And, I'm a big supporter that not one technology fits all. So, a lot of these, like if we think about BEAD granting, fiber doesn't always make sense for many of these areas. So, Yeah, so this is this is a great answer. It's accessible to a lot of folks, and you can implement it a lot more affordably.
And there's an incoming change. I'll just make a quick comment here, right, with the new administration, and I even would say even with the older administration, government administration in the last year or so, it started with fiber, right? And then I think people realized, obviously, fiber doesn't solve every problem, and financially, it just doesn't make sense in certain environments. So I think fixed wireless access is super relevant, but I, understand that government wants this to be done if they're going to help finance it, to do it in a way where availability is not a question, right? Because connectivity, right? Food, shelter, connectivity. That's what we're living today. It's a critical utility, right? Any of us, like, would you be okay, getting electricity or water, but it's not available sometimes, and that's just the expectation everyone sets?
Right.
Definitely not, right? So I think connectivity is the same way, and the government is willing to fund the development of fixed wireless access networks. They just want to make sure that part of that development and deployment is based on an asset that isn't going to go away. And I think Band 53 obviously falls into that category.
It certainly does. It certainly is very useful in that aspect. My state specifically has expanded that mandate a bit to include licensed by rule, right? And so GAA CBRS falls under the licensed by rule. But if you have a licensed spectrum, then the reliability increases exponentially based on that. The process of applying for these grants and really the ability of smaller operators such as myself to successfully do these things and apply for this grant money is very daunting and fairly prohibited, or inhibited, I should say, by several factors. And one other thing that this has done for me is it's been able to allow me to continue to build my networks in the natural way that I have been operating for about the last 10 years, and be able to finally report to the broadband data collection service that I am providing what is now defined as a broadband connection to the NTIA, 100 megabit down and 20 megabit up.
That's huge.
And that is over a licensed and licensed by rule combination of spectrum. And it meets all of the criteria that it needs to allow me to continue operating in my areas without worrying so much about government funded networks coming in and overbuilding me, undue competition that will likely become unsustainable in the future. And I'm kind of getting into a bit of my opinion about it at that point, but it's just it levels the playing field in that way, where you can say you're doing it, and you're doing it right, and Band 53 becomes a key factor in that because it is licensed, especially, and it even though it is 10 megahertz wide, effectively, right, from a practical standpoint, it still adds a significant amount of download speed to your network. I mean, I'll take another 65 megs all day long. That's a great addition to anything that I've got. And I happen to have a Band 41 license as well. And so I am able to aggregate all of this spectrum, thanks largely to the innovations that we've been able to develop on the global telecom side, on the CPE side of these things, where we can aggregate all three carriers, and then you're really providing an immense amount of throughput to a user. And it's really a good alternate to several other technologies that are out there at this point that have a lot of hype behind them. I'm a big believer in 3GPP and the evolution of LTE. And here we go to 4G, here we go to 5G, here we go to 6G. Yeah. And it just continues to get better, more robust, and more reliable. And I think that it's a good ecosystem to get involved in. And Band 53 provides people with a more comfortable way, a more reliable way, a more confidence building way to begin that journey.
Deborah, I have a question for you, just to kind of use this as a segue. You know, I would love for you to kind of give us your perspective of how easy is it to get access to Band 53 through some of the deployments you've done, right?
Yeah.
What does that process look like? You know, we just kind of went through formalizing this with Hawk Networks. I think it'd be super interesting for people to understand that, you know, while this is licensed spectrum, it's really kind of fairly easy to get your hands on it, design with it, deploy with it, registered with us, with the FCC and all of that.
Yeah, and I think this is what's just, I mean, it's so exciting because to Michael's point, he was saying earlier, I missed the auction. I mean, prior to this agreement, this is kind of the first time it's really been accessible in that way, because prior you would have kind of two ways of getting access to licensed spectrum, right? You would either participate in the government's auctions, and these were quite expensive, and the commitments are lengthy. And, you know, even the process to apply to participate in the auctions was a hardship, right? Or at least precluded a lot of smaller operators. So if you missed or did not participate in those, then you would have to be subleasing, you know, either through a broker or directly with a carrier who had access to the spectrum. Carriers
even more expensive and more time consuming.
Right. Yeah. And that's the carrier spectrum. So they really didn't have a, you know, I mean, for them, they're planning to deploy to that. So they really don't have an incentive to aftermarket or sublease that spectrum. So, and then many times those deals would be bespoke and, Masad, to your point, a patchwork. So you could maybe get a little bit here and maybe this spectrum there. And then that means you'd have to deploy a bunch of different CPE and a bunch of different, you know, Bs, and this spectrum.
Hard to scale. It's really difficult to scale that reality.
Right.
True success.
Yeah, so let's even think of it. So maybe you're John Deere, or maybe you're a hardware manufacturer. Let's say you're Starbucks, you're trying to deploy a private network. Are you going to go to, you know, the big three, T-Mobile here and AT&T there, or work with a spectrum broker and get this patchwork of a spectrum? It just was very much, it was inhibitive. And this is where we saw, you know, really the development kind of stagnate up until, you know, CBRS became a little bit more available, but again, has those reliability issues. So this innovation and partnership together with Hawk and Globalstar is a game changer. Now, all you have to do, go to our website. There's a little form. You let us know where you wanted to deploy the spectrum. We're going to double check that that's available in your area. And you know, come back with that quote within a matter of a week. And go through the paperwork to sublease. It's affordable. You know, we're looking at, you know, leases that are a much more a shorter time length. So, you know, you're not having to deploy for 5, 7, 10 years if that's not, you know, there for you. So you can go ahead and secure that spectrum for your build out, get that wrapped up and that piece of that out of the way within a matter of you know, weeks rather than the months and sometimes years long process to do it in a bespoke way and then build your network. And what's great too is we're a one-stop shop. So you can contact Hawk Networks. We can, together with of course Nimbus, who on the expertise side do system integration, work on, you know, your planning, your integration, your, you know, and really, of course, the building platform that Althea has as well. And I think that's the other kind of exciting piece too, is now that we have this opportunity with the spectrum, there's lots of new technology we can develop together, right? Putting these on platforms and even making it even more accessible. So I'm really excited about where we're at now, but also where it could potentially go in the future, and creating this environment where really any company or small, medium-sized operator can create and have value in this space. So super exciting.
Yeah, I mean, both of you are doing such a great job of, you know, collapsing the complexity of the reality of private networks, and that's why we consider you such an important part of our ecosystem, right? we love the partnership with you. Band 53 is part of the bundle. It's a building block, but it's all available at the same time. And for people that are trying to experience private networks and figure out what exactly they're going to do with it, you do make it really easy, right? And that's a very compelling value proposition for people that are trying to explore and see what this is going to do, right?
Well, that, it's the proverbial easy button that we went, to Michael's point, in 3GPP we've been after for so long, and it's really a value add because of the heterogeneous network, or heterogeneous sort of value of a 3GPP network. So you're going to deploy to your handsets, your fixed wireless. It's really everything, public safety, all of those verticals, all those use cases in a single network. And that's, and I think, as Hawk deploys networks as well, Michael, Nimbus, you do too, we're seeing where, if you're really just going into one vertical, consumer, you're limiting yourself. But with 3GPP, you can support that local, enterprise. You can support the maybe there's a nearby mine, or, and I don't know if you can maybe speak to where you're, yeah.
Let me just offer a little bit of detail about how that has expanded for me. So LTE as a comprehensive communications solution really offers me access into these other verticals beyond consumer broadband that are incredibly lucrative and allow me to create very concrete relationships with good entities to know, let's say, in my areas. Smart agriculture. In my area, there's a lot of bean farming and hay farming, alfalfa. There's a lot of beef production. And so we have very large ranches, and they require a lot of management, a lot of resource monitoring. Water is of the paramount, at the paramount of that, and so what I've been able to do is provide an alternate to the big three for the LTE connectivity that these things run on, for IoT solutions, for drone solutions, for machinery control, for process automation. And from a smart agricultural perspective, it's becoming a very, it's just a very useful thing that lets the ranchers keep it within their own footprint. They're not relying on an outside source like the big three, or really anyone beyond their local provider, that really I step back and become a point of support for them, right? It's their spectrum. They lease it. They buy the equipment from me. And then I step back to a support role, and they run their network and use me for support. And so the same thing is true for the energy sector. There's a lot of oil and gas here, and traditionally they operate on 900 megahertz, right? The problem with that is that there's not much throughput to it. And so as they begin to add in more services, as technology in that sector advances, they find that the wireless that they've been using for the last 30 years is starting to fall short in a big way. And transitioning those networks for the energy sector people into LTE is creating a scenario where they can run internet, they can run IoT, they can run voice, they can run video monitoring, they can run the same things, process automation, machine control, all of that, using one platform and one set of spectrum, and Band 53 makes that more attractive and more accessible to them because the spectrum is theirs under a lease, and it's not CBRS. Not to say that there's anything wrong with CBRS, but it does have those reliability issues. It is built to fluctuate, where the Band 53 doesn't. And so, those verticals, those other enterprise level customers would not necessarily be as interested in me if all I could bring them was 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi.
Yeah, Masa, maybe you can tease that out a bit with what y'all are doing with XCOM RAN as well too, and where you're utilizing that for indoor enterprise, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an additional asset that plays a role with Band 53. XCOM RAN is a technology and a product that we have available that Paul Jacobs and the XCOM Labs team have developed and are now it's being exclusively licensed to Globalstar. And the idea behind this RAN, it's very novel, very innovative. The idea of being able to use coordinated multi-point technology in a very pragmatic sense, right? Not theoretical. This is like we're actually deploying XCOM RAN commercially to coordinate resource blocks available through different radios with overlaps and everything else, and essentially take the interference, what is traditionally an interference, where you have the overlap from different radio units, and processes that at the central unit and turns that into additional capacity, right? So what that really translates to in practical terms for Band 53, it takes that 10 megahertz channel and makes it look like 40 or 50 or 60 megahertz channel, depending on how big of a cluster of radios you really do. And this is very relevant for XCOM RAN in the context of some private network opportunities. At our investor day just a couple of months ago, we actually did a live demo of XCOM RAN on Band 53. Deborah, you were there. You saw this.
That was great. It was exciting to see that in action. I mean, that theory.
It opens up a lot of interesting use cases like neutral host, use cases that involve MOCN technology, multi-operator core network opportunities, because it takes that Band 53 spectrum, maybe with CBRS, and makes it look a lot larger and provides for SLAs that tier 1 MNOs would certainly require, right? So if you do an implementation of neutral host network with just CBRS, right, at some point you're fundamentally not really able to meet the SLAs that someone like Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile would expect. If you have that anchor, and I love that reference, Michael, that you keep using, really Band 53 as an anchor, it gives you that SLA, it gives you the capacity with XCOM RAN, it multiplies that tremendously, so that you fundamentally shift gears in terms of ROI equation for neutral host and some other private network manifestations.
And I think that's really exciting, because if we think about use cases, like say like a port, or like it's really kind of this mixed use cases, and we're thinking about the future of connectivity. I mean, this is really where, Althea's machine-to-machine payments and kind of purpose-built architecture and blockchain really combine with how we think about the, like a port's use case of a future of autonomous shipping and supply line tracking, and think about the robot sort of moving. We always envision this, the radio actually the radio or the RAN side really playing a pretty big part, right? How are you allocating resources not only, but how are we tracking how things are moving in space and time, and utilizing the Althea's platform? You can also create a payment from that too. Wanted to kind of tease that out a little bit. We have Community Agents AI. I'll give a shout out to you and here in the chat, talking about some of the AI stuff. And that's really where, these things kind of come together in that future. And really, I think that's kind of the other exciting thing for me. It really feels like an inflection point. Where all of these tools are really building the building blocks, whether that's, the 53 and the core and the machine platform for payments and routing, and this kind of easy button for deployment allows us to capture value in the emerging machine economy. It's really not going to be sending net 30 to a net 30 invoice or a piece of paper, or sending a check from your smart trash can or your smart, AGV or forklift or something like that. We're really creating a new kind of paradigm in how value is captured and transferred.
I can't help but think about when we were at MWC Las Vegas last year, and how much of the conversation was around operation of airports and how well they fit into what you're describing right now, where that is the probably quintessential example of that mixed use case, where you've got ticketing systems, you've got cell phone users, you've got internet users, you've got security systems, you've got all of these things that you could run on this platform, right? And then when it comes to the machine payment system, there's, the ticketing systems and the vending systems and things like that also that come into play for that technology stack. And that was just a thought that brought up for me was, airports is like, think of it in the context of an airport, how much communication happens there and how much reliability that needs, and what these products and what things like the XCOM RAN and the Althea machine payment system bring to those networks.
That's super interesting use case, because if you remember just a couple of years ago, maybe a little less, there's all kinds of issues about C-band availability at airports due to altimeter interference and everything else. That's still work in progress, right? It's not front news anymore, but I know everyone is busy trying to figure that out. In the meantime, all of the tier 1 MNOs, they went to FAA, I think, and said, okay, we agree we're not going to deploy C-band in the close proximity of the airport for the next few years, right? So I think the combination of what you just guys talked about, I think super relevant for the use case of airports, additional spectrum, XCOM RAN with multiplication of the spectrum that is available, some blockchain activity in terms of figuring out how to let people transact with additional capacity that they maybe need, especially in an area where there's a lot of people that want to do a lot of things, right?
And they're on the move.
There's a real monetization opportunity.
Yeah.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to touch on a couple of these questions that folks have around the CPE. I know we touched on it a little bit, and maybe we can kind of even tease out a bit more just kind of the ecosystem, where it's at now, where it's growing, and speak to that just for folks that are kind of looking at the practical elements of deploying.
So I'm aware of a few things that I'll bring up right away, and I'm sure, Mirsad, that there are additional XCOM products in this space. But I am particularly aware that certainly the Global Telecom CPE for fixed wireless is available.
Both indoor and outdoor as well. So they have and in 4G and 5G. Just shout out to Global Telecom. They've done a lot of work and innovation in this space and been a great partner.
And in addition to that, Nokia does have some handheld devices, push-to-talk radios, tablets. I believe because they're using the Qualcomm chipset that they make Band 53 available. Also, I found that BEC does have a few radios that support the band, and we all are aware, I think, of that Apple iPhone 14 that does it as well.
iPhone 13 and above supports Band 53 natively. So when we were doing our Band 53 demo with XCOM RAN at the Investor Day, we were actually, one of the devices we were demonstrating that with was iPhones.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to just the general, probably, the general trajectory of acceptance by many UE and user devices is, of course, with the Qualcomm chipset, where we've got a lot of supported devices now, the ecosystem's just growing.
Yeah, I think it's on a pretty good trajectory for growth. That was definitely one of my trepidations about the whole thing as well. Is this the only CPE I can have?
Oh, there's lots, yeah.
And it's growing,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big thing, just to let everyone know. I think that's, when you're just because it's new, right? And this is why we're doing these webinars, and we'll continue to have these available. And of course, on our hawknetworks.net website, you can learn a little bit more. Globalstar has some information on their website too, but feel free, if you have questions, happy to send additional information, and we'll continue to do these webinars so folks can get a better understanding of really the this pivotal moment and this exciting, Legos tool chest of things that folks have now to build networks with.
Yeah, I think, early wins lead to more wins. We're super excited about Band 53, where it's going to go. You guys are doing a great job of trailblazing, and we really appreciate your partnerships. There's a lot of other things I think that are going to happen down the road with with respect to band 53. You know, MVNOs, they're always looking for spectrum and trying to figure out how to offload some of that traffic from their partners. MNOs, I think in the beginning might be really looking at band 53 out of necessity in the very specific regions, right? Mid-band spectrum, C-band isn't quite available everywhere, right? There are areas where there's military activity and similar where the spectrum fundamentally was never allocated, right? So band 53 out of necessity could start in areas like that. And then out of convenience, it could expand into the other parts of the country, even with tier 1 MNOs, in my opinion.
Well, that's a really interesting thing. I want to just touch base on this a little bit. And of course, we'll have more information coming out over the next few months. But one of the really exciting things now is that some of the new innovations in eSIM technology allow for, you know, devices to roam between a private and a public network. So it's no longer that like hard division between like, this is a private network and this is a public one. I mean, certainly the ability for small, medium-sized operators or even enterprises to be an MVNO or to build their own private network that then has some roaming is really changing. Man, I think this is such an exciting time to be in telecom, because the idea of like, this is public, this is private, it's getting really blurry. And that allows for a lot of sovereign use cases too, which I'm really excited about. Maybe you're Farmer Dave, you have, you know, a few thousand acres of corn, and you really want to have that security and that sovereignty of your own network, but still have still be able to roam into a public one when you need to. So that is, and maybe that's for a webinar in the future. So for folks that are joining us, make sure you, like and subscribe, and for the next ones we have coming up.
Very good.
Well, okay, so final wrap up. If y'all could just kind of share, if folks are looking for more information, of course we were happy to have reach out. We have a Discord channel. You can ask questions there. YouTube, our Twitter at Althea or Hawk Networks, 2 different Twitters there, as well as LinkedIn. So we're very accessible across platforms. Please feel free to reach out. We'd be happy to chat with you about how your vision, what you're trying to build, and how we can help you do that. But maybe just also closing comments, Michael and Mirsad, how folks can reach out to you as well.
For sure. Globalstar.com. Our marketing team has been very active on band 53 specifically in the last few months. You'll find a ton of information there. Please follow us on LinkedIn. We're also active on other social media platforms as well. And then for those of you that are heading to Barcelona for Mobile World Congress, please visit us at our booth. We're going to actually have some band 53 related demonstration work. And I think it's going to be really exciting for people to kind of see that in action and experience it, not just see it. We're going to let people maybe even experience that real time with some of their own devices, depending on what device they bring with them to Barcelona, right? But we're going to be in Hall 2. If for those that are going to be in Barcelona, please consider stopping by and saying hi.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to you more.
And anybody interested in learning more about my journey with Band 53, the innovations that I helped to pioneer, and any more sort of the technical in the weeds kind of stuff, pretty much from an engineering standpoint, you can reach out to me at nimbussolutions.org, and I'd be happy to discuss my experience with anyone that's curious further about it, and the strides that I've taken with the partnerships here to make these things a reality in the field. Nimbussolutions.org.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining us across everyone on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter. Appreciate everybody joining us today, and look forward to talking more in the future. Take care.
Thank you all. See you soon.